Hey, Sydney, what's your favorite way of not getting any sleep? You know what? I don't think I want to know that. No, no, no. What's your second favorite way of not getting any sleep? Okay. Uh, Scratch that too. Let's reframe. What is the most common way in which you deprive yourself of a good night's rest? If I was to bet money on it, I would say it's spending time with that little rectangular device that you keep in your pocket, either in mindless scroll mode or in rabbit hole mode, or some combination of both, unless you've devised some sort of system where you have to literally put that thing in a dungeon in your house or, a proverbial dungeon. And I think it is challenging enough really to deal with something so engaging and addictive as an adult. But today, I think I want to talk about how the network effect is absolutely toxic to children, or rather, let's say, how the network effect is, if unmanaged, a deleterious presence in the development of a young mind. For any eavesdroppers, you're listening to Ways of Thinking. So, quick notes. I'm sat at my desk is the messiest it's ever been. You're probably going to hear things being shifted around while I get myself comfortable. More vitally, though, you'll notice that it's been a good while actually since my last recording. The fact is, at the moment, it looks as if we're in kind of a fortnightly cadence. Ideally, I would do this once a week, if not more. But circumstances, life, etc., mean that this is the only way I can do it to any level to any degree that kind of approaches the quality I would really want it to be at. So when I miss a recording, you don't not hear from me for a week or 2 weeks. You end up not hearing from me for a whole month, right? But the reason for missing, this recording a couple of weeks ago or whatever is quite, it's quite a heavy one. It's not something that I don't think I was prepared to share. But it hit me hard. So yeah, I didn't record because I went on vacation. I went on holiday with my family, and it kind of threw me off kilter a little bit just in terms of spending time with my loved ones. It was fantastic, and you know what? I don't regret it. Fuck it, sue me. What are you gonna do? So. So that happened. We're kind of back on track. I've been pretty clear about the fact that this first maybe 10 or so eps aren't going to be so heavily researched or prepped. It's mainly going to be off vibes. It's mainly going to be off of my own sort of conjectural views on a lot of the sort of subtopics in life that we probably resonate on. Last time we talked about electronic warfare, or the emergence of electronic warfare en masse, and what the guerrilla of the 21st century is going to look like, and that was quite harrowing. And I think some comic relief was desired, at least on my part. And this subject, I think, is perhaps equally grave, at least in its implications. And it's a bit dry, but I don't know if we're going to need too much comic relief on this one. I think let's sort of just power through it I'm trying something a little different today. And if there is any random comic relief coming in, it's going to be courtesy of my daughter. A few fucking zingers she's dropped over the fucking years. Excuse my French. The most recent one being that, I was talking to my partner. We were trying to make arrangements to maybe go out for the weekend because it was the Easter holidays, and we were going to go, I don't know, to a zoo or something. And she said, well, if we buy our tickets online, we'll have to get there before 10 a.m. And I said, because I was just in that mood, and I said, oh, that's untenable. And then my daughter said, 9. And this kid out dad jokes me on a regular basis. Like, I've actually kind of like given up on delivering dad jokes because she will do it until my eyes roll into the back of my skull and like just fucking snap my optic nerve. Just, oh my God. But yeah, there might be a couple of those. So yeah, speaking sort of my daughter and our subject matter, i.e. the social epidemiology of smartphones within juvenile development, right? She was telling me about how she was speaking to a friend and they were just talking about what apps they have on their phones, on their respective mobile devices. And, my daughter was like, I've just got one app that says Dad is watching you. That's all I've got. No, she kind of said a couple of regular ones, Netflix, whatever, I don't have the list off the top of my head. And, this other kid had TikTok, Instagram, the usual suspects. If you're 21, right? Nah, really. If you're older teen. And that kid made a comment to my daughter saying, why do you just have Netflix and stuff? And then the kid then went on to say that those apps are for old people. And I don't know. That to me, ultimately, it's a simple case of out of the mouths of babes, right? But I think it does say something important about authority, not authoritarianism, but about how much authority someone thinks someone has on a certain subject. And this is more about generational authority, right? Taste is one thing. We're not going to really get into that. I don't think I'm on some sort of crusade to govern the tastes of people per se. But it did make me think how when technology sort of enters your life as a child, you tend to be able to speak its language quite readily. And when someone of a previous generation has some input, you're a bit dismissive of it, right? So I do want to talk about how I think our specific generation actually has a little more authority than our kids give us credit for, but even more so than the generation before us. I'll unpack that properly before you start thinking that I don't value the opinions of our parents, of their generation, etc. But that is the story, right? Like it's as old as humanity and as old as civilization. Since time immemorial, new technologies have emerged. Youngsters adopt them or are born into them, and then parents have always kind of had a similar response, right? With TV, you always had the don't sit so close to the TV; it'll turn your eyes square somehow. Whatever. That's really just a synecdoche of all the reasons why your parents would tell you not to watch too much TV. When you look at video games, the response, for instance, to, excuse me, when you look at video games, the response to, say, Mortal Kombat ranged from, hey, I think the combination of graphical realism and depictions of extreme violence might not be appropriate to children, to, yeah, the devil made this. If I see you even have this video game in the house, I'm going to exercise you. And, now we, the parents, are voicing our concerns about social media and smartphones when it comes to our children, right? Now, I want to start really by defending our parents a little bit, partially. Right? I think the moral panic around video games like Mortal Kombat was, in some cases, at least in retrospect, a bit extreme or maybe not nuanced. But it did bring about age ratings in video games. So it can't have been completely off base, right? Like, even though Mortal Kombat and Resident Evil, for instance, I think are sort of less of an issue in that it's sort of cartoonish, crazy gore, right? It did mean that you couldn't really just put Grand Theft Auto as it exists today in the hands of a child and then no one would be accountable for it. So that's why it fucking chafes my taint that, like, you see parents who should know better, parents younger than us, right, who obliviously just let their kids play GTA or play, video games online without any oversight or without any understanding of the concepts that they're exposing their children to. And yeah, it gets that's a bit of a bugbear for me, right? Because I think at a certain age, without a massive compensation in some other aspect of your life in terms of guidance, I don't think certain kids can play certain games without turning into fucking assholes, right? Sorry, if your kid's an asshole. Your kid's not an asshole, Sydney, but if anyone's eavesdropping and their kid's an asshole, it's your fault. So our parents did have a point there. Otherwise, these age ratings wouldn't have really been of any use, right? Like, this is something new. We need to manage it this way. And you're always going to get some push and pull and the pendulum swing in one direction or the other in terms of what's deemed as acceptable. But that doesn't mean that our parents weren't wise about what they were saying. I remember once a friend's mom saw us going out and, we must have been very early teens, 13, 14. And, we were all dressed up to the nines, late 90s, early 2000s. So, we put on our best flipping Rough Rider cosplay, had our bandanas on. I had a bandana on. I was like, yeah, that's how I roll. And and she proceeds to say, you can actually get in trouble sometimes if you're wearing the wrong color bandana and some people see you wearing a color that they don't like. It can actually lead to some trouble. And we looked at each other and then we looked at her like, you sweet, innocent old lady. You know nothing of this culture. And now that I've grown up and you see all this shit with the Crips and the Bloods and gang warfare, I was like, okay, maybe I should have listened to that kindly old lady who was a judge, by the way. Like, we were so fucking arrogant, So let's think about this. That says something, I think, about the personality of a child because it's developing and there's a degree of rebellion, sure, but it's very sure of itself. But really, my true thoughts on the generational divide solely in terms of technology is that, like, while we may have been too quick to dismiss our parents' insights in terms of the technologies that emerged and matured during our formative years, they also did kind of have some major technological blind spots that maybe undermined their argument. just solely in the digital sense. In the social, psychological, interpersonal, personal sense, who can argue? But in the techno-cultural sense, I can see why the message didn't come through to us a little bit, right? Like when a new device entered the house, as when we were kids, a lot of the time you'd be the one who ended up getting it up and running, working, connected to where it needed to be connected to. You know, if your folks needed the VCR programmed for one thing or the other, then really they're going to be turning to you for that, to get that done. And, you know, like I still can't explain Wi-Fi to my mom. I like the concept. I'm like, no, yes, you do have you have the internet on your phone through this way. Like, I can't find the right metaphor because she doesn't have the same priors, right? If I told my mom that I saved all her photos on the cloud, I'd find her outside 4 hours later looking up at the sky like, which cloud is it again? Is it that? That's a big cloud. I don't think I have that many photos, Takuzo. No. I'm telling you, man, the priors are different. Ultimately, I think, though, because of the way tech has become part of our lives, those technological gaps also become social gaps. That's not a way of, again, dismissing previous generations to us. It's actually a way of saying that we, when it comes to the generations that follow us, do kind of have a bit more domain expertise as a general cohort. Just on average, I think some sort of tipping point has been reached in terms of what the folks know versus what the kids know, right? We might actually even be the first generation of parents that knows about the tech our kids are using, even maybe a little bit more. And that's just the fact that we're digital natives versus our parents who are digital immigrants. And the jump from digital native to Zoomer technologically is not that great. Even from digital native to AI native, barring any sort of real major cultural shifts, right? We grew up with a firm enough understanding of file formats, file paths, user interfaces, whatever, connections and component specs, etc., and a real sense really of the World Wide Web. So moving really from that to Bluetooth to the next thing, it isn't as big a leap. You know, we may not understand our children's customs and culture and social structures, but I think that's a good thing. I don't think I'm trying to be too fucking controlling, but there seems to be a degree of paternalism that comes with devices like this, and there always really has been. I think the idea that I find it funny that sometimes I'll think about a way of managing my daughter's use of her mobile phone, of her smartphone, and I think, but is that being a bit too paternalistic? And I think, well, I am her fucking paternal parent, aren't I? I'm her fucking dad, yes. So, yeah, paternalism is a very interesting thing because it's not just about how my daughter uses her phone. It's about how my daughter's friends use their phones, because then it's going to have, you've got a 3-body problem socially, all right? So with that being said, I think it's worth just going through like some bullet points of what is it really that makes smartphones and video games and social media such an issue. Like, really, what's the big deal? Because it can't just be the content, right? We grew up with wild content. You know, we grew up on South Park, Eminem, T2, Mortal Kombat, etc. You know, that's just the stuff I'm willing to admit to. You name it, right? So why is this different, really? Like, like sometimes my daughter will be like, can I watch that? And I'll be like, no, you're far too young. But when I think of myself at the same age, it's like I was knee deep in Friday the 13th and stuff like that. And I think it's really just down to technological determinism, right? It's about the very first word that comes to my mind when I think of this, when I think of why it's different for my daughter than it is for me, is volume. It's the sheer volume of content that my daughter will have access to, right? When they say it's like at the tip of your fingers, it quite literally is. But like for us, that content was about a mile walk away. We grew up on physical media entirely, or almost entirely. And I think that brings about a lot of very specific realities, right? For starters, the fact that it's more scarce and frankly more expensive per item means that you're going to repeat that content a little more. We're going to get a bit non sequitur going on, but I do think that that's an important point, that you didn't just, when the movies you grew up watching, you didn't just watch. You watched and watched and watched and watched and watched and watched. And I don't know quite how that will affect one's approach to craft or to media craft as they grow up. Also, you obviously had to watch this on a shared device that wasn't very mobile. So like if a fucking sex scene came up, like you're going to have to think quick about whether you're going to let this just ride or just be like, nah, maybe you'd blame me, you know, if your dad walked in and it's like, yeah, Takazo brought that, you know. Or like my trick was always to have a newspaper on hand. So if a sex scene came on and my dad was in the room, I'd know that I'd see him look at me in the corner of his eye and I'd just be like, just reading the news, old man. Oh, is there something on TV? Why'd you put that on, old man? So yeah, that difference between the physical media, the accessibility and the volume thereof changes how you learn about media in general. Obviously, the fact that pretty much all media that our children consume is now acquired over the internet, and it's either streamed directly onto their device. That opens them up to a whole host of phenomena that change things in a fundamental way, particularly the algorithm, right? Without going into detail about what the algorithm is, you know, it's a whole bunch of different methodologies that are going to be used to target a viewer. And the thing is, the kid will see themselves as a viewer, but at the other end of that, at the other side of that algorithm, is someone seeing that kid as either a unit to be sold or to be bought. You know, there's a profit motive around what this algo is going to show that user. And then the very fact that it's viewed on a device that's extremely portable, that's concealable, frankly, that's basically a device that we asked for as a society. I remember in the early 2000s when mobile phones were first out, and we're like, wow, imagine when they finally have color screens. And then the next phones came out, and you know, that next generation of phones came out, and we were like, oh wow, color screen, that's really cool, but there's just something a bit missing. I need a bit more. And then and so on and so on. And then bam, the iPhone came out. And by the time the iPhone came out, we had been gagging for just that sci-fi level of good. And so we had no reason to truly resist because we'd dealt with janky flipping phones leading up to that, in much the same way that I think right now, if you look at how rough AI is, that's almost if you look at generative AI mainly, and you look at it quite kind of how rough it is, it might actually help them to just leave it that way for about 5 years. So by the next time the next step change comes in quality, we'll just be like, just fucking take my money, take it all. Do you know what I mean? Have my child. I have two, So yeah, the fact that it's digitally acquired rather than physically acquired, the fact that it's not repeated as much, the fact that it's algorithmically targeted, the fact that there's a profit motive, which by the way I think is really down to some real obfuscated commerce and advertising, like the way my kid doesn't see how the advertising aspect of what she's consuming is involved is quite interesting. And you know what? I'm guilty of the same thing. Do you know what I mean? And the fact that it's extremely portable, and the fact that this can be hidden, like the fact that your dad could walk in while you had something you shouldn't have been watching on the screen is important. Like now kids will just have that right in front of them, right next to their flipping caregivers, without any, if there's no oversight, and could be exposing themselves to a gang of stuff that really, they have less than no business viewing. And the fact that, as a market, we asked for it, we really clambered for it. The real thing, though, I think, or one major aspect, is that the content that your child then views is largely user-generated. So on one hand, and a lot of this is always going to have this two sides to one coin, right? The opportunities of user-generated content, not unlike what I'm doing right now, are massive, right? However, I think when you're talking about guidance, there's a very different implication between something that's user generated, even if it's on a platform with guidelines, versus something that's been through many corporate decisions before it even reaches your child's eyeballs. Which is interesting. I never thought I'd actually be saying this. I find myself taking positions that maybe 15 years ago I would have bristled against, and maybe that's just part of growing up. But the user-generated component is actually huge on a psychosocial level. Even if you're not a fan of of Disney, the fact is, from a parental standpoint, that logo is actually a kite mark to say, well, it's been through all these checks and all these checks and all these checks. Even if you don't like what your kid's watching, we're not showing them anything that you fundamentally would be against. I mean, I don't know about now. That could be debatable. But so it's just interesting. I think that the thing with the sort of apps that are extremely addictive, and the devices that they're on, and these sort of massive multi-billion-dollar social media conglomerates that actually run these apps, is that among them, they've kind of started to enjoy a level of plausible deniability, which is to say that they'll say, oh, no, it's your choice to buy this device. Oh, no, you have to look after your kid's use of this device. But it's like, at the same time, they'll be like, that being said, we're going to make it as addictive as possible, and we're going to make it really fashionable. And also, we're probably going to be a bit cagey about what the age guidelines on this are. I didn't even realize that WhatsApp, the minimum age for WhatsApp up until recently was 16 years old, right? And they're bringing it down to 13. So I almost picture a day when there's certain apps that'll have the same age rating, on the front page or whatever, as you would see on a DVD cover or whatever, 18, 15, whatever. But I like, sometimes I just have this internal rant in my head, which is like, these companies that mean that it's necessary that I own this device, and yeah, I play a role in that too, because fuck, they're fun to use, but they need to start factoring in how much time I spend having to manage how my kid uses that device, right? Like, holy shit. Like, if, you know what, there needs to be a new business model around that. Do you know what I mean? I've got some thoughts. And while we're fucking at it, I find it interesting when, sorry to go on a tangent here, but I find it very interesting that the people talk about echo chambers and the idea that, well, hey, you know, you're just listening to people who agree with what you say, and da da da, and then you have a feedback loop of opinions, and then therefore because you get a positive emotional reaction to being agreed to, you always seek that out. But sometimes I'll scroll through stuff that I watch and I'll be like, I don't think I'm the one in an echo chamber here, YouTube, right? I think that, like, actually you want me to be in a more tidy sort of box. You want me to be more packageable. So you'll show me shit that I will watch that I'll end up watching just because, I don't know, I'm like, I don't have time to, I'm sitting on the toilet, you know, like I just need something to watch for 5 minutes. And I kind of wish there was a feature where I could just shake the phone like an Etch-a-Sketch, right? Or if I had YouTube open, for instance, I could shake the phone like an Etch-a-Sketch, and it will show me a For You page from a random other user, obviously not disclosing their identity. But like, what does someone else's front page look like if I press this button, right? Anyway. There are fundamental differences in terms of the technology. It's not, you know, I heard someone describe it almost as a singularity, right? In that, you know, you've got this it's the multimodality really of that phone, right? A lot of the stuff we consumed had to be done through different devices. A lot of the activities had to be done through different bits of technology. But then the ubiquity of that phone that turns it into your camera, your notebook, you name it, right? Every single fucking, your TV, right? Is extremely dangerous. And I think a singularity is a good way of describing it, because suddenly everything orbits around this thing. It's got such a gravitational pull on every aspect of life that it starts to pull everything into an event horizon and then fucking spaghettify your fucking psyche. But yeah, a little bit ranty, but that's kind of where I'm at with why it's different. And I'm probably going to listen back to this and think I have explained that terribly. But I've just I'm really just getting stuff off my chest here. All right. Hold on. It's getting hot in the office. Hold the line. I'm ranting so hard that I'm working up a fucking sweat over here, fam. Anyway, okay. So, this is ironic. Right. Here's the thing. I've kind of been thinking about doing this app for a good while. So what I like to do is I start a WhatsApp group with only myself in it about each episode, and then I just text into that episode. I wish though that like what WhatsApp would do would be so that you could tag a message, so you could put a color tag on it, and then you could just filter out within messages. And I don't know, whatever, stick a bot in there and then talk to it. But I find that quite interesting. I think Meta have found their resurgence, even with this whole metaverse situation being a little lackluster. Their approach to AI with the Llama 3 model and with open sourcing so many of their generative tools has kind of led to a resurgence in that company. So I hope I'd like to see WhatsApp turn into, I think WhatsApp might become a bit of a super app, if I'm honest. Anyway, so yeah, ironically, I'm going to turn to my phone now because I've been sending these messages to myself for weeks and weeks and weeks. And if I sat down for 2 days and ordered them into some cohesive, critically argued research document, that would sure be fun. But I have a life, and yes, doing this is a major part of my life. But other stuff gets in the way. So if what I say doesn't follow on from thing to thing, just know that I'm just going through each message that I've sent myself about this subject. I'll say what the message says, and then I'll expand on that. And we're just going to try something different. So, randomly, I heard a line in an audiobook I was listening to, and the guy said, "Well, I'll be a cross-eyed baboon." So, that's I'm just saying that. The first thing actually that I said, that I sent to myself, was that there are few things more exhausting than living a double life. And I found this when I've tried to over compartmentalize my life and say, I have my creative pursuits and I have my family life. I have my job that I hate and my job that I'm pursuing, and all these things. I realized at some point that trying to be two different people requires the energy of two different people. And I think this is relevant to phones just in the sense that everyone has the person that they are face to face and the person that they are when no one's looking and they're on their fucking device and dark and everything goes dark around them and it's just their face lit up by this thing. They're like, and they that's a different person. And I think that the very cognitive load of existing in that way will lead to a sort of the body keeps the score kind of situation where it's actually you're working way harder and burning way more calories on this than you think you are, and it's going to exhaust you potentially. Random joke from my daughter was when she was 4 years old, I went to a parents' evening at her nursery school, and she was putting up a stack of wooden blocks, and they were kind of veering off to the side a little bit while we were talking to her, her nursery carer, teacher, whatever. And I just sort of looked over there and I kind of thought I'd encourage her by saying, oh, hey, straighten those up a bit, we'll go higher. But I said, it's looking a bit precarious there, kiddo. And my kid just said, you're precarious, and carried on playing with her blocks. I talked a second ago about the singularity of the phone and it just having a gravitational pull. Firstly, on the technologies that we used to have separated and splintered, but really also in the very aspects of our sort of day-to-day lives and thought processes. So the phone in and of itself might not have a great deal of harm, but because it deprives you from engaging in something else that has a great deal of good, it then has this sort of second order effect. So your phone deprives you of sleep. It's the sleep that's the thing, right? It's the lack of sleep. It's not how long you're using your phone necessarily, in the sense that you could find another point in that day to use a phone and still get enough sleep. It probably changes how likely you are to eat. It changes how long you're going to sit on the loo. It changes the amount of opportunities you're going to have for, to make eye contact that otherwise would have been a bit of serendipitous a serendipitous moment, right? So I'm quite interested in understanding that rather than the specific mechanism itself, which I know is worth plenty of study, it's what is it stopping from happening, really? That's what you want to be pursuing, isn't it? Right? This is just the message that I sent. I'm not saying it's my entire thesis statement. The other thing that I found interesting. I was listening to an interview with Robert Sapolsky. I think he's a neuroscientist. He wrote a book called Determined about determinism, some type of philosophical determinism. Basically, he believes that there's no such thing as free will, right? And it's because every decision has a prior state, and you can go back till the beginning of time to then say, well, like, there was no point where that was ever going to deviate or shift. So therefore, every decision you make is just a direct result of what was happening directly before that. Anyway, he also made a really interesting point about, if I can try and remember the analogy, it's about that we have three brains, right? So, you have your limbic brain, which is just pure, just need and want, right? And then you have your reptilian brain, which is a bit more sort of a bit more motivated, but it's still quite base, right? It's like just your base stuff, like get warm, get cold, eat, hunt, fuck. And then you've got your sort of, neocortex driven human mammalian brain, which is all the thinky parts that get caught up on weird things that happen and that's sort of socially driven. So, limbic brain, reptilian brain, mammalian brain. And then when I was listening to that, I thought, oh, that's interesting, because smartphones attack every single one of those, each one separately, right? They attack your social brain, and then they attack your reptilian brain, and they attack your limbic system. Like they just run a full court press on the mind pretty much all day. It's funny how much of your life, or how much of your happiness, or how much of your self-worth, or how well your day goes is determined by just a number. Oh, you look at your bank balance and you're like, ugh, or you're like, right? You look at your likes and your subscribers and your replies, your notifications, and you're like, oh, or whatever, whatever your reaction to those things is, depending on, what you were hoping to see. But I think it goes far deeper than that. Because I only realized that when I looked at the time and realized it was a couple of minutes later than I thought it was. And I was like, oh man, I was really hoping for a 53 there and not a 59. And I thought, it's literally just numerical determinism in an emotional sense, right? Okay, right, moving on. So we talked about knock-on effects, and we talked about the three brains by Robert Sapolsky and how the phone attacks all three. I say again in my messages, the network effect is toxic to children. And I think it is. I think it's the network aspect combined with the user-generated aspect. That's the place that I want to study. Oh, and so the next message, what are we looking at here? The addiction mechanism. So let me try and unpack this, because this was a little while ago. But so the whole point of an addiction is that it will sedate you from some sort of source of pain, right? They trick you into thinking that your problems have gone away. So a kid goes to school, a kid has a whole, gets bullied or what have you, then comes home, goes on their phone and goes on YouTube Shorts for a couple of hours. They feel sedated. So when you then go and ask that kid, how was school? They've basically had digital Valium and they're like, yeah, it was fine. Because they're being honest, they are fine now. I think that's where it becomes a problem, because obviously over time, the actual issues don't get solved, and then they metastasize and compound, etc. And before you know, you've got a massive situation that you didn't even know was brewing right under your nose. So the phone as an addiction mechanism is an extremely important thing to think about, because an adult would already be socially, mentally, emotionally equipped, and not always, mind you, versus a child who's really had no chance because they have no prior knowledge of anything else in life, right? Just going back to the little thing about the knock-on effects of phones, right? I think a better analogy is this, right? It's like if you said money is the root of all evil, and then some fucking nerd like pushed up their glasses and said like, oh no, actually the love of money is the root of all evil. That's the real saying. And you're thinking, shut the fuck up. Shut up. Shut up. It's like, I get it. But I think the next major thing that I've messaged, that I sent to myself here was wait till AI gets involved, right? Wait till what your child's interacting with is especially geared towards getting a mind of a certain age to think in a certain way. It would be so foolhardy not to mention it, right? Like we've already, obviously, yes, machine learning and how it engages with kids and not, etc., we're already swimming in that water. But generative Turing test passing stuff when it comes to kids and how they spend their time, that's I don't like. What's going to happen? What are we going to do? What are they going to do? Right? That's going to be extremely worth keeping an eye on. But I think just moving on from that, because I haven't really unpacked it, but I just do want to say AI, right? Another thing is that about phones and your kids is that it makes it really impossible to assure your kids' media literacy, because you don't actually know exactly what media they're consuming unless you're absolutely flipping helicopter, like, looking over their shoulder and looking at what they're doing. It's, the whole adage, you can't improve what you don't measure. Well, you really, I don't think, once a kid reaches a certain age, have a real measure of what's being consumed. And on one hand, right, I'm actually quite happy about that. I do think there's a free rangeness where it's important to let your kid go out and explore, because they are growing up in a very different context from what you're growing up in. But kids are fucking stupid. How about that? How about kids are dumb as fuck? And you need to be able to guide their critical thought. However, critical thought takes a long time to develop. And I think that there's just way too many opportunities for it to get hijacked, right? But yeah, ultimately, I do think most kids are quite smart and quite thoughtful. So that's fine, I guess. But that's a thing worth thinking about. It does make me wonder, though, like, are we talking about digital hygiene, or are we just talking about obedience? Are we talking about the fact that we were extremely obedient as kids, even though we were kind of playful and a bit irreverent, right? Or is there a real leadership issue going on here, right? I don't know how things are in Zimbabwe at the moment, but in the UK, there does seem to be this dearth of true leadership. I think the family unit, most family units are respectably put together, I think, but within the school system, I don't know. I can't really comment on it right now, but I'm a bit like, not underwhelmed, because if you speak to a teacher, you can tell that this is a very accomplished and focused, dedicated person. But I think maybe we spent so much time worrying about fucking systemic racism and haven't been worried about fucking systemic mediocrity. How about that? How about just fucking make the system excellent? I don't care about the fucking nuances of microaggressions, because it's in the name. It's a microaggression. It's by definition teeny fucking tiny. So how about you focus on optimization? How about an optimalist? Maybe that's what I am nowadays, right? I've had a lot of thoughts this month. So what is it really, right? Like digital hygiene or obedience? How much work do we have to do on ourselves to understand what work we have to do for our children? Okay, I'll tell you what my real gripe with phones is. It's a love-hate relationship. Here's what I hate about phones, right? Here's my real gripe. It's that you can't even smack your lady's ass anymore without the risk of her having a phone in her back pocket. And it ruins the moment, dude. Like that's, if there was to be a moment that symbolizes how much these things interfere with human interaction, it's that, innit? Like, it's like you go for a smack and then, flipping, I just hit a fucking Gorilla Glass panel. Oh, great, you know? Anywho, moving on. I know the book around this that's going to have the most buzz at the moment is Jonathan Haidt's book. But anyway, it's his latest book. I haven't read it, haven't looked at it yet. The book that helped me most deal with optional digital technologies, though, was Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism, and that's probably one of the most impactful books I've read in the last whatever few years, and it really helped me to start managing my relationship with optional technologies and my phone, until I fell off the wagon and then just became as bad as I always was. Nah, I'm kidding. There was a general improvement. Jonathan Haidt did make a good point. He said something interesting, make a good point. He made an interesting point, which is about how social mobs form online versus how they form, IRL. And I think high school is like a different thing. Like, I think the anthropology of high school is a whole library of study, right? But this whole idea of like when you apologize to someone face to face in real life, it's going to be contextualized by a lot of things, and it tends to work, I guess. Whereas if you apologize on a public forum online, it doesn't get taken on too well by the superorganism quite often. I suppose that's down to the art of the apology, right? That's, again, another entire book worth writing. And I think more than anything, I guess it just highlighted to me that difference, that you are in a different realm when you're, flipping, cruising down the information superhighway, baby. But yeah, ultimately, we are participants in what's happening here. And you know that the adults are just as addicted to their phones as the kids are, because if you ever say to an adult who's actually quite reasonable, maybe we should just take phones away from kids, they're like, oh, no, hey, wait, whoa, what? No, that's a bit extreme, isn't it? Because you know that if you took it away from your kids, people would say, well, maybe we should take it away from you. Maybe you're the one with the problem. And we're like, I don't have a problem. I can quit whenever I want. Honest, I'm telling you, honestly, So why is the network effect important? And why is algorithmic capture such a major issue? Why are echo chambers such a huge issue? Why is the interplay between social media and one's self-concept and even just temporal understanding of their life path such a big damn fucking issue? Well, it's because people are setting themselves on fire, self-immolating based on what's in their echo chambers, right? Outside the Trump trial, about a week ago, a man poured an entire jerry can of gasoline on himself, set himself on fire. The video's there. I'll share it with you if you want. It's flipping fully uncensored. And burned himself to death. By the way, didn't die on the scene, but died hours later in hospital. And if you looked at his manifesto and you looked at his writings, he talked of how, Peter Thiel and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Bitcoin are all part of a Ponzi scheme designed to ultimately rob the worker of their rights and this. And look, I get the sentiment, right? Like, I don't even completely disagree about that separation of the proletariat and the ruling class. But when you looked at the details, it was like, this just looks like a For You page gave him content that drove him to do this to himself, albeit with maybe some underlying predispositions to doing this, right? But the fact is, a man publicly committed suicide by setting himself on fire based on the digital content that he was citing, the digital content that he was consuming. And that's so terrifying to think of, that maybe we need to go back to my friend Matt and ask him for some comic relief. So one time, who's the band that did the Final Countdown? I can't remember. Anyway, he changed the title to the Final Countdown, and that's how we sing it from now on. However, let's go back to this gentleman, and let's go back to what this really means, because it doesn't always have to be a physical self-immolation. It could be one of all sorts. It could be one that fundamentally changes your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your siblings, your friends, your relationship with yourself when you're looking in the mirror. And that, to me, is cause for not just concern, but cause for action. This seems to be an issue that is extremely bipartisan, that's omnicultural, and probably this is, in a very weird way, this looks like our hole in the ozone layer moment, right? Only it's the ozone layer is the collective psyches of our children and ourselves, frankly, let's be honest. So yeah, I used to write a lot of music back in the day, and I don't do it now, but every now and then a few bars will come to me and I'm like, that's fire. Too bad no one will ever hear it. But there was one line that I wrote a long time ago that has always stuck with me. And I think it speaks to this very situation over here, which is, we may not have sold our souls, but we've definitely sold our minds.